some people are probably listening to this saying, holy crap, $100,000. There's no way I could do that. No way. But I'll get you exact numbers. But if I had to guess, I would say our revenue increased by $500,000 that year. Kick it.
Welcome to Strata Stories. My name is Thomas Schreiber. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Strata PT. Strata PT combines your EMR and billing into one automated system to increase revenue and achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate for physical, occupational, and speech therapy clinics. On today's episode, Paul Singh, the CEO of Strata PT, talks with Justin Stiver, the owner of Total Therapy Florida. Paul and Justin talk through managing referral quality for financial sustainability, building proactive relationships with decision makers, leveraging targeted marketing for account growth, and positioning private practices for ACO partnerships. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and billing services work, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo. Now, without further delay, here's today's episode.
Let's talk about referrals or building relationships, because we were talking in the pre-show and you sort of mentioned very directly, you're like, yeah, the cost of your business development people, probably one of your highest costs. I don't want to steal your words. So you said something there. You were like, what is it that you tell those business dev people?
Well, I just really remind them, because they're constantly, they think of and the more that I talk to them, the better they do with this as understanding it. But you still have to remind them that, say, just to make things very, very level, say you have $100,000 employee or $250,000, whatever you have a $100,000 employee cost to business development, full-time person going out there that is developing business. And we could do that. We made that higher when we had two offices open, and they were doing well, and then we were looking to open up a third. That was when we decided, and then our part of our growth plan was going from 3 to 5 or 6 pretty quickly too. So we were able to, we brought on $100,000 per year person. I think they were making a little bit less than that, but by the time the end of the year, bonuses and stuff like that, however you structure it is differently. And I think last time we talked about the ways you could structure it. But the daily cost for that is huge. So if you are worried about spending $100 extra on a lunch and not factoring the fact that, hey, you just spent an hour talking about that. We just spent 2 hours going back and forth about whether or not we should spend an extra $100, and that just cost us $100. So let's be realistic about your time, and also, and then it kind of also, so to make it more clear, I want to tell you about kind of how we measure the referrals. So we take a report out of Strata, that's the referring provider report. We run, and that shows us the year, and it shows us the top. I think you can go down as far as you want, but we stop at around 40 doctors, top 40, and we take that for the whole company, and we take that, and we also run that report by the clinic. So the whole company, and then by the clinic, and then we kind of we have a grand map, that we know where every referral source is, and then we also know if they have their own physical therapy department. So say we have a doctor in Sarasota that has their own physical therapy department. You would think it makes sense that maybe we're not going to get a ton of referrals to our Sarasota clinic because they have their own clinic there. That makes sense. Maybe during season that number goes up because they are on a wait list, and now we're getting their overflow, and then it almost dries up. So that's something that does happen, and that's realistic as long as you can explain why it's happening. But then, say 5 miles south of us, we have an Osprey clinic, and then 5 miles north, we have a Lakewood Ranch clinic. And say our Osprey clinic is getting 9 referrals per month, and our Lakewood Ranch clinic's only getting 2. That doesn't make sense to me. And that's all numbers that, if you're not looking at it the way that we're looking at it, you're just looking at the big number, and maybe that doctor sends us 25 people. So, oh heck, that's number 2 on our list, or number 3 on our list. So we're happy, right? But if you don't dive deeper, and you don't pick apart the details, so then we say, we're not getting to the Lakewood Ranch Clinic. And I have to say, like, a busy orthopedic surgeon, 2 referrals could very well be that they just Googled us and found us, or were repeat patients that found us. That tells me right there that that's not a meaningful enough number to say that doctor's not referring on purpose to that clinic, whereas 9 to our Osprey clinic is on purpose.
Yeah.
So then we can kind of say, what's the issue there? In the past, when we've done this investigations, we found that maybe the doctor they had an old marketing sheet of ours that didn't have the Lakewood Ranch Clinic on it, because we had opened that up 18 months ago. Or the nurse that promised that she did it didn't put our information into their EMR as an option when they send the referrals. They'll come back to me and say, I know what it is. It was this problem. They didn't have us in their EMR. Okay, good. That means that next month we should have 9. And as much as you ask, because I've learned, and I'll throw my business development team under the bus. I start off, they've learned the wiser now, but I'll sit down and say, hey, how's everything going? Great. Okay, how's it going in Sarasota? Great. Doctors love us. Man, it's going great. Okay, how's it going in Lakewood Ranch? Great. Everything's great. Okay, that's great to hear. Let's look at these numbers. Well, all of a sudden, the numbers aren't as great as they say. If you're looking at it from too zoomed out and you just look at the 25 referrals, then great. But if you drill down, like I was just talking about, then they say, okay, I figured out but having these conversations, you're not going to figure out those problems unless you do. But then it's not over there, because then you have to say, okay, what's going on with Lakewood Ranch? Okay, I figured it out. We're not in their system. The lady promised me. I can't believe this happened. Okay, well, let's get it fixed. Next month we should have 9. To come back 2. Okay, what's the problem now? Well, come to find out, the receptionist that is used to referring to a different company, and they're pushing people towards that company. Okay. And then I lean on my business development team. I say, hey, do you happen to know if that company has full-time business development person that is his job is to go out there and make good relationships with these doctors? And they say, no, I've never seen a salesperson from that company ever in all my sales calls. Okay, so is it fair for me to think? Well, I say, what's a fair timeline to where we will become that receptionist's favorite PT company? And okay, now I can see the writing on the wall here. What you want me to do? Yes, that's the kind of higher level thinking. Instead of going in there, you have to. So you really have to go into that office and dissect it. You have to draw a diagram on the flow of the referrals, and then you have to start making actionable strategies to go and change that flow to where they're flowing to you. And one thing I always tell them is, like, we want to be professional. We don't want to go in there with scare tactics and push people around. We have our standards that we hold. But you can be very direct. There's nothing wrong with being very direct. I said, let me ask you this to my team. I said, do you think that we have the best product out there? And absolutely, like, there's no one out there that I'm hearing from doctors that's better than us. In fact, that's never been an issue. Okay. So if you're confident that them sending more business to us is going to make their life better, then you can be very direct with them. We're not selling a product that's worse than what they're already using, so we have to convince them to use us. We're trying to make their lives easier.
I feel kind of dumb asking this question, but when you say, like, be direct, like, I guess I'm just trying to understand, like, what's the incentive for that practice to change? Like, to your point, be direct, right? But like, what's the incentive for them? Like, they're like, oh, I don't, my marketing material is fine or whatever. Like, and I know that sounds like a dumb question, but
So when I say practice, are you talking about the doctor that's referring to us?
yeah,
Okay.
like what's in it for them to send
To
them?
change their ways, basically, is
Yeah,
what you're
because it's
saying.
not like, as far as I know, it's not like money's changing hands or anything like that. It's really about that relationship.
There's two main things. And as physical therapists, we wish that every orthopedic surgeon or referring physician valued the quality of care as much as we think they should. But that's the truth is that some of them do. And but it's kind of like how you've put it before. Like that's being decent quality is like the table fare of what these doctors need. And as long as you can provide that and they're not getting complaints back about you, then their level of interest beyond that is it goes down as a whole. There's certain doctors, especially, and I find it's more the up and comers, like the new surgeons that are new to a practice that are really dedicated to perfection. And I hate to group everyone into this way because I add the more seasoned they get and the bigger their practice gets and the busier they get. It's just that they truly they just don't want to be gone back to and be yelled at by their patients for sending them to a physical therapy practice, which is a great actually strategy for us. And we come in there and we say, hey, how often do your clients come in there and complain about their physical therapist? And there's some companies that they do. We try not to use those companies, but in general, everyone loves their physical therapist. Okay, boom, right there. That throws the easiest and most natural message that physical therapy companies have out the window. Every practice owner that I have that has one or two locations, that is their primary message. We are so good. Use us. We're the best. Your patients are going to
Yeah.
be taken care
Right.
of. But that's
Right.
honestly, the doctors squash that pretty quickly by saying, oh, all my patients love their physical therapist. Okay. Oh, shoot. Now what do I do? So that message is important to say. Everyone has to say that we are high quality, we're the best.
Yep.
But the biggest moving factor is is that you have to get the doctor's approval. You have to get their stamp in order to send to us. So that's an easy job. You go in there and you do a lunch or two, and you handshake with the doc. You say great, and then at the end of that lunch, you say, hey, do we have your stamp of approval to have your person up front, your gal that sends out the referrals to try us out? And absolutely, absolutely. The answer is always yes. Absolutely. Until yeah, you guys are great. The patients love you. Absolutely. You have my, okay. And then you walk out to that receptionist and you say, hey, Doc gave me his stamp of approval to have you start sending patients to us. So that puts a little pressure on them okay, now the doctor wants me to send to them. Okay, they're great. But changing a habit, if they're used to sending to a competitor of yours for the last 5 years, they're still going to have that deeply ingrained habit, and over time they're going to be drifting back to that old habit. But if you're in there twice a week and you're going in there and you're saying, hey, Amy, we're really looking forward to seeing some of your patients. Unfortunately, we haven't seen that coming through yet. So I just want to make sure there's not a technical limitation here. Can you do me a favor and walk me through your referral process? How does that work? Are you giving the patient that referral and saying, call your own physical therapist? Are you giving them a list of people and saying, here's our recommended people? Or are you recommending someone specifically? And if you are, is it you that does it, or is it somebody else? Is it the nurse or the PA that sees them at that last appointment? And you have to figure out how that goes out because every office is a little bit different. And then you say, okay, looks like we're all set. We're in your EMR. We're on your list. And by the way, can you move us to the top? I don't know about that. This is a sacred list. And okay, well, if you're the only one going in there and calling them, because most private practices don't have a salesperson, if you're going in there twice a week and dropping them off a coffee and hey, what can I do to help you? Then eventually you're going to build enough goodwill to where you can ask, hey, Amy, we've been working together for 6 months. My and this is Jason's strategy. Jason, him and I tell him to throw me under the bus all the time, use me as a bad guy. So, good cop, bad cop. So he says, I just came out of our quarterly business development meeting and I got my ass chewed because our Lakewood Ranch clinic is not getting any referrals from you guys. And like, can you do me a favor and can you put us to the top of the list on that Lakewood Ranch office? All of a sudden that brings more weight because now as soon as Jason leaves, if he's just doing a courtesy, hey, we're the best, here's candy, here's coffee, see you later, how's everything going? And this is something I've told him, you're not allowed to say that anymore. You're not allowed to say, how's everything going? Because their default answer is going to be great, now leave me alone. But if you say, I got a problem. I would like your help understanding this and maybe fixing it. I'm going to check back in with you in a week. And you go back in there and say, hey, I still don't have any referrals. The whole time she's going to be like, I do not want that guy to come in here and make me feel bad again. You know, he's such a nice guy and he brings me coffee. So I want to start sending business to him. And then you start creating that strategy. And you know, my partner Brian actually gave me this is how I kind of founded this strategy. Is he said he used to go to his clients and say, hey, this year we did X amount of revenue with your company. I'm working on next year's numbers. What do you expect we're going to do together this year? And the guy's always like, oh yeah, we did 2 million last year. You know, you can certainly expect more than that
Yeah.
this year. We're growing. You know, everything's
Yeah.
going good. So we'll do 3 million this year. And then now you have a benchmark to hold them accountable to. Like, hey, in my notes I had we were going to do this much this year in this time period, and we're not doing it. Is it us? Oh no, it's not. It's not you. It's not you. Okay. Are things not as busy as they were for you last year? No, no, we're
Yeah.
busy. Okay.
Yeah.
Where's the problem?
This is like, I love like, obviously what you're doing there is not simple. I'm sorry, not easy, but you make the way you explain it is very simple, and that's really awesome. This is gonna be, you can throw this idea out, but as you were explaining that, it reminds me of, like, I know you've got the Active Adult YouTube channel, and you probably know on the YouTube side that they mail you, when you hit a certain number of plays. Do you know about this? It's like they
Yeah,
send you these like big plaques, you know. So like as you're talking, I'm sitting here thinking like, like whatever YouTube does with that, like, they send you like the silver play button at a certain number of views, and then the golden one, and then like whatever the other medals are. Makes me wonder, like, you know it's kind of like, hey, you just crossed 100 referrals to us. Here's something for your office. And I don't know what would resonate, like whether it's a beautiful plaque on the wall or if it's something else. But then it's like tiered, right? It's kind of like those newsletters where you get something from the newsletter company if you refer a certain number of subscribers.
exactly. And I would say,
um,
you want to make sure you're staying within the law as far as how much you can spend and stuff like that. But what we've learned is it's not about throwing money at somebody. And you got to be really careful. I mean, I'd be lying if I said certain orthopedic surgeons probably couldn't be bought. I mean, it's there. Most of them though and the ones that you really want to do the business with anyway, are freaked out about getting anything that could push them over that annual limit of Stark laws and all that stuff. So if you don't have to spend money, and that goes back to the beginning. Like, the money that we're spending on the business development is not subject to scrutiny on the Stark laws. Like, I can pay someone $1 million per year to market for me and go into the doctor's office every day, and that doesn't count against us. But if they drop off $100 thing to this restaurant, all of a sudden, yes, that goes towards that dollar amount that we can spend. So your conversations and your relationships are really what we're trying to build here. We're not trying to do that. So we have a lot of complex strategies that would take multiple calls to talk about, but getting people out on the golf course and getting people out, for example, we're doing something next month where we have an up and coming orthopedic surgeon that just started with a big practice. He's really good. He has excellent outcomes. We're having him come to our office and talk about one of the procedures that he does in detail with our clinic directors. That was all done by Jason and the sales pitch during lunch. Be like, hey, how can we get you get them talking. The best lunch is to get the surgeon talking. So asking questions like, hey, so tell me about anything that you do that's different than what the typical orthopedic surgeon. Oh, I do this procedure where I don't use a tourniquet and it's much better for the patient. And that's really interesting. Our patients would love to know more about that, and our vessel that we can deliver that through is our
yep.
physical therapist. Would you be open to coming and talking to our team after work one day and talking about this procedure so that we can tell our patients about it? Absolutely, I'll do that. Then you get them into your facility. They see how nice it is. They meet all your top therapists. They have a vested interest in your business now, even if it's not a financial interest. It's just a vested interest, and making those connections is priceless. So and it's it's chess. It's
Yeah.
a game of chess.
And you said, just to tie it back, you're looking at that referral report monthly? Or how often are you kind of like, what's the feedback loop on this? Because obviously it's not
Monthly.
like, okay, monthly. Yeah. Yeah.
So we
Because,
do a
yeah.
monthly meeting with the three of us, the two business development, and us and me. And their job is to, we have a spreadsheet that we take the PDFs that I talked about earlier from each clinic each month and the total company, and we add it to a master spreadsheet that compares. So our spreadsheet, and I'm happy to share it with you later. But it's basically, it's pretty simple. It's every month comparing, and then last month, and then comparing the same months previous year. So I have
So it's
so
really, yeah, it's like month current, it's like last month, the month before, and then it's like year to date, and then prior year to date. Is that kind of what it is?
yes, we do track the overall year to date and then last year's total, but we also track current month last year and last month last year so that we can compare, because that it's important to do that because seasonality is huge. So um September, if you're comparing September to October, October is going to be busier. If you're comparing, June to May, June's going to be slower for us because people are, leaving after Mother's Day.
Yep.
So if you're not comparing to the same time last year, you're not going to be comparing apples to apples. And you could recognize trends on a monthly basis. So like if there's no legitimate reason why a doctor went from 32 to 20 in 1 month, like, so that happens all the time. We all have the doctor go from 32 to 20, and it's not because of season. So then I say, hey guys, what happened here? Well, Doctor so and so went on vacation for 2 weeks this month. Okay, that's right. Or he's going in there and figuring out that they got a new surgical scheduler. Their surgical scheduler quit, and from their last job, they're used to sending it to a different company. So now your 32 referrals are at risk of changing drastically. But that surgical scheduler comes in there, and if you catch it in the first month, then there's a good chance you can go in there and
Right.
introduce yourself, talk to the doctor, say, hey, we saw these numbers drop. It's not us. You usually, that's what it's doing is great. You're happy. The only change was your surgical scheduler change. Do you mind if I get you to vouch for us to your new surgical scheduler and tell her that we're great and we're your top choice? Oh, absolutely. Let me walk out there with you right now and tell her. All of a sudden that number goes up. But if you're sleeping on these numbers and 3 or 4 months goes by before all of a sudden your bank account is showing the problem, which I think unfortunately is how a lot of practice owners that I talk to run their business, is like, oh, when I start feeling the pain, I'm going to pay attention to what's happening. Then you're 3 or 4 months away, and then things are harder to change.
Yeah.
It's harder to
Yeah.
turn that around. That's why we look at it monthly. Then there's a lot of strategy there, and then we compare it between clinics, like I talked about earlier. And then on a quarterly basis, we spend a whole day every quarter for just business development planning, where we're talking about larger strategies. Like we're talking about offices that we have no presence in. How are we going to chip away at that? And by next quarter, can we make a meaningful change?
Yeah. If you remember, I don't know if you remember this, but like, roughly when did you start this process? Like, was it, when you had your first clinic, or was it after you felt comfortable running your third clinic? Like when was, like, now, obviously anybody can look at you now and be like, oh man, Justin's got it dialed in. But when did you like start this process?
We decided to invest in a full-time business development person when we had two clinics opening our third. I'd say the first year that he was with us was he came from the healthcare industry, which I would recommend that if someone's looking to hire somebody. I would recommend finding someone in a um, it would be great if you could find your competitor's business development guy. Don't get me wrong, but a more suitable thing, which is what we did, was we pulled someone out of a different healthcare industry. So our guy was selling oxygen to all the doctors around. So
Yeah.
he had already had a network of people within 30 miles that he could had great relationships with, that he'd go to and say, hey, you know how I was getting frustrated with that last company I was at because they weren't delivering on their product. Just so you guys know, I left them because I know that I only have one reputation, and I couldn't stick it out with a company that wasn't delivering on the products I was selling. I linked up with this physical therapy company that is amazing, and I would love for you guys to try this out. So our sales the first year went through the roof because of just bringing his contacts over. If you're bringing someone over cold, or you're taking a PTA or someone like that from your company and that has no good relationships, it's going to be a much slower process. So I would say you got to factor that into, some people are probably listening to this saying, holy crap, $100,000. There's no way I could do
Right.
that. No
Right.
way.
Yeah.
But I'll get you exact numbers, but if I had to guess, I would say our revenue increased by $500,000 that year.
Wow. So
Um,
it's, yeah, I mean, it more than paid for itself.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, more than paid. Now, it's still a larger percentage of your revenue than you want to have long term, but I think, I would say at that point we were probably around maybe 6-7% of our revenue was paid in the business development column of the P&L,
Yeah.
through his lunches or spending and his salary.
Yeah.
So but as we grew to 3 or $4 million in sales, that number goes down, way down to 3% or 4%. So and right now I think we're around. We brought on a second person, and right now we're around 5% of our total spend, and we're probably going to be able to get that down to 3% by the time we actually maximize all 7 clinics that we have now, which I think is a solid number. I think if your marketing business development king is at 3%, you're doing well.
Yeah. And just to be clear, that's 3% of the overall spend, or 3% of the overall revenue. Yeah. And I think it's probably worth people noting, like, you're operating in a fairly competitive environment too. It's not like you're the only guy in town. I don't say
No.
that to hurt the business or anything like that. I just say, for anybody listening, it's like, we're not talking about a strategy that only works in like some rural county where nobody else exists. This is what you're actually doing in a pretty competitive environment, in central
And
Florida.
certain markets that we're in are more competitive than others,
Yeah.
and that is
Yeah.
the way it is. And I would say the rookie leagues of business development, which is kind of, in my experience, and I hope Jason's not listening to this, but the tendency is usually for them to want to operate at the rookie league level unless you give them guidance. So like, that's going in there and making sales calls and driving around and asking how things are doing and doing lunches and talking about your products. And that's rookie league business development, and it's effective to some degree, and it's actually quite effective in really weak markets. So going to doctors that have never been called on by a physical therapist, that can be effective, because they're the only physical therapist that's ever brought me lunch, so I am going to send to them. But if you're going into a more competitive market, which most big markets are, the rookie league stuff is going to bounce off of them with
Yeah.
zero effect.
The interesting part of this to me, and again, I you can talk to me like a second grader, it's all good, but I got to believe that a lot of people watching this or listening to this are probably feeling the same way as me. When we first started talking about this topic, I was thinking that you would have to take a bet on hiring this role, and by take a bet, you'd have to kind of like wait 6 months to see the results. But the way you've described this is that, the way I would paraphrase the way you've described this is that you can see incremental gains at least on a monthly basis, and then these things tend to compound, as
Mhm.
long as you nurture them and maintain them and keep an eye on them every month. Like, so
Yeah.
that's interesting. Like, because that 500K that you mentioned in terms of growth in that one year, tell me if I'm wrong. If we went back to that year in your financials, it probably wasn't like evenly distributed. So it wasn't like 60 grand a month in increases evenly across the 12 months. It was probably like $2,000, and then it was like 10, and then it was like 30, and then it just like, it compounded
Yeah.
through the year, right?
And the
Yeah.
hardest thing to do, and I think the naysayers will say that, how do you tie that to a single business development person? Well, yes, we're not running two parallel businesses. We don't have you know, we can't compare them to, one that did and one that didn't. But we know that you can track the referral sources. Like, start looking at the doctors that sent you for the first time. That's a good way to look at it. But I would say, like, getting there and getting all the, low hanging fruit first is is a really good strategy.
Yeah.
The low hanging fruit are the ones that you already had relationships with, that are, geographically located very close to you, or you have some kind of good connection into their office. I guarantee everyone's. I mean, because, there's three or four people that I went to high school with or college with, or that work in an orthopedic office or a doctor's office, that like, you got to kind of write all that stuff down. And so where can I go to for low hanging fruit first, and get some business, and having a person at the time. Like, I was treating a lot back then, so I would rather take the revenue of treating and then have someone else being, spending it, versus me going out there. And I think that's a mistake too. I think I would not be nearly as good as Jason if I was going out there making the sales calls.
Yep.
He's way more effective than
It's a
me.
different skill set. Yeah. I mean,
Exactly.
it's a different skill set. The,
But I think that he would be less effective if he didn't have me advising him and being a part of the business development team. I do look at myself as part of the business development team, because I am, and I think most owners of, my size practices that pay attention to the data. That I think that's important. If you're not going to pay attention to the data, don't do it. It's not worth it. Don't do it. But if you're one of the practice owners listening that says, I do pay attention to the data and I do like doing that, then you're going to be a great asset to the business development team, because
right.
they are not going to be paying attention to the data.
That's right.
They're laser guided or they're missiles, and it's up to you to put the laser guided part on them. You know, if they're shooting off into the sunset, they're not doing anything. But if you're telling them where to go, and they're going to execute for you.
Yeah. 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 I think a lot of people, make excuses for not looking at the data. I'm too busy, or I know what I'm doing, or whatever. Um, or if they do look at any of the data, they end up looking at what I call vanity metrics. I still remember when I was a kid, 35, 40 years ago, I still remember my dad had a little construction company, and I remember he would carry this like green book around with him. And I remember at the time, all the local newspapers would, call him up and be like, "Hey, listen, we're running a special on this ad space." There's newspapers back then, right? Nobody had Google in the 80s, right? But the point is, like, I remember they would like try. I would listen in on these sales calls, and these guys would call my dad, and they'd be like, "Okay, yeah, if you put a 6x6 ad, our readership is like." 37,000 households. And my dad would write it down. And then he was such a smartass. He would be like, okay, so actually it's 36,999. And the sales guy would be like, what? And he's like, yeah, I mean, I got your newspaper yesterday. I haven't opened it yet. So you really shouldn't count me in your number. And so then after he was done being a dick, he would take the bet, because you have to take a bet sometimes. So he'd be like, all right, I'll run it for 2 weeks. And then for the next 2 weeks after the thing, he would just, in his little book, he would ask these people, like, where'd you hear about us? And then he'd like keep a little tally. And that's his version of the data. There weren't spreadsheets and stuff like that he was using back then. It's just kind of one of those reminders. The only reason I share that story is because, like, the longer I stay in this business and learn from guys like you, the more I get further and further convinced that the actual business of running a practice is really no different than many other industries. But yet, getting practice owners in this particular industry to recognize that is incredibly hard. They're you know.
Yeah.
Um,
And what
but
I will
anyway,
say is, with the business development side, the more you do that, the easier there is scalability to that, because they get better at what they do, and then they get more comfortable, because we talked earlier about having a seat at the table, right? And that's got to it's not a specific. We're not actually saying they're sitting at some magical table and talking about this stuff. They don't do that. But this is not happening that way. But what we've missed out on a few opportunities. One of them was there was a local orthopedic group nearby us that we thought we had an unbelievable relationship with, meaning that we were getting a lot of business from them and their patients were coming back happy. And to a minor degree, we personally knew some of the partners in that practice. But they decided to build a nice, beautiful facility to move to, and then brought PT in-house and had a company come in from out of state to manage it. And I was like, oh my gosh, that was a slap in the face, I'm like, what in the world? That brought me to reality of what sitting at the table actually means. So I told Jason, I said, I'm not going to beat you up too hard about this, but I'm pretty pissed that doctor who you've called on for 3 years that you didn't know this was coming down the pipeline, or uh, didn't get us in on that conversation ahead of time. And he's like, well, what happened was, it's not Jason's fault. It's just that's higher level than what he was operating at. So we've learned to change things, to change the way once we get in the door, once we start building rapport, then we start trying to talk to the right people and having the right conversations. And now we're getting ahead of it and saying things like, hey, if you ever do decide to bring PT in house, will you just do me a favor and contact us? I know that we, don't make the mistake of having an outside company come in, because, what happens there is, and this doctor that did this is very unhappy. Now he's reaching out to us saying, how terrible this company is because the staffing issues. And I'm like, well, we have, 40 therapists
Right.
surrounding you that you wouldn't have that problem if we've had 3 people apply for jobs in the last month that we don't have a place for.
It's interesting. Like, I didn't mean to cut you off, but it's interesting. You're just connecting all the dots together. And I'm going to say this assertively, but I would love for you to just kind of poke holes and tell me I'm totally off the ball here. But the way you talk about your sort of referral strategy, your referral retention, your referral management, and all that, really what it comes down to is that look at the data and use that to kind of shape your focus. But at a more abstract level, how do we drive awareness that total therapy exists? And then how do we drive even more credibility that total therapy is going to add more value or add more credibility to that referring office? And I don't mean to oversimplify it, but like, these are very classic marketing style conversation. I mean, I remember in one of my other businesses years ago, the sales guys have all these fancy terms now, but we called it account-based marketing. So we knew, like, in this particular other business that I own and still run, I guess, but we every year we name like the top 20 accounts we want to get that year. And then once the sales team has named those accounts, the marketing team joins the meeting. And what we start to think about is like, okay, how are we going to drive awareness and how are we going to drive credibility? And from a marketing standpoint, and one of the easiest tactics we still use to this day is billboards. So we will, like, if we know the actual addresses of where the HQs are for those prospects, those accounts that we've named, we might divert, $2,500 a month, $5,000 a month, depending on the region, to just plastering billboards all around that office, so that when our sales guys walk in that door, it's not like, hey, I'm so and so from whatever. It's like, hey, you might have heard of us. Yeah, we're like all over, or
Yeah.
And if
And you don't even
we
have
would
to
like,
say that because they just know it.
right, because we would start the marketing campaigns, the on the ground marketing campaigns, and in some cases, so it'd always be like billboards, and sometimes we would actually send like what we call lumpy mail, and lumpy mail would be like, depending on the size of what we think that account would be, we'd actually like literally send a beautiful box with some Veuve, like champagne in it, and it would say like, hey, here's some champagne, you guys are badasses, signed, and then our team name, company name or whatever. And like, we called it lumpy mail because you got to open it. It's clear what it is, right? And so we would the marketing team would just like hammer these accounts with just visuals and gifts like that. And so when the sales guys do make contact, it's not like, hey, I'm so and so. It's like he's wearing his shirt. He walks in the door, and that front desk's like, oh my God, are you the one? Like, oh, you got that? Oh, yeah, 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 that's us. Anyway, but all I'm trying to say is it's so similar. This is account-based marketing, is what you're really
Yeah.
talking about.
And then once you get the account is understanding how how they're driving revenue, because the thing that I also wanted to touch on, which is important, is not every referral is the same. So we were finding, because my business development team really would just wish I would go and network with every insurance out there so they could say, hey, by the way, we're your one-stop shop, da 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 da. Well, the truth is, you gotta know, um, Humana is an insurance that a lot of our docs around here are looking for places to place those patients because they're not accepted widely. Well, they pay us like $63 a visit, which is around 60% of Medicare's rates, and we can't make money off that. We're losing money every time we see a Humana patient, unless we aren't going to see anybody in that time slot, which is a very realistic thing sometimes out of season maybe. But so we had doctors that they might have 20 referrals on the month and we're thinking they're doing great. But when you start digging down into it, and if you're not paying attention to this, you would never know that 17 of them are Humanas. Okay. So what happening there is you're actually shooting yourself in the foot, because that doctor is saying like, oh, I got this other company that I really like, but so send all your Humanas to Total Therapy. I don't want to make them mad by sending them but Total Therapy. Well, a lot of times it's not because they don't like you. A lot of times they don't know. Like when we go back there and had the conversation, like, hey, doc, I really appreciate your referral and you trusting us. How's the patient feedback? That's great. Okay. Well, then, this is kind of an uncomfortable conversation to have, but you're sending us 80% Humanas. And he's like, okay, what's the problem? And you're like, well, we lose $20 every time we see a Humana patient. You're like, I really love that you're sending to us, but and now 90% of these doctors are partners in their practices, or they own the practice too, or they're somehow incentivized on profit. So they understand it. Once you have that conversation, like, oh shit, man, I'm sorry, and you're like, no, it's no problem. Like the reason we accept Humana is because we don't want to just take all your best. We want to have some kind of olive branch to extend you. And but we really need to be getting like your quality referrals too. So you say, hey doc, what percentage of your total patients are Humana? And they say it's not over 15%, 20%. And you say, okay, so 15 20% of your patients are Humana. What if we had a realistic, like, opportunity to say that we want to see 2-for-1? So every one Humana that we see, we're looking at, and all's good as long as we have 2 referrals from a non-Humana where we can actually make our money, because we can lose a little bit on Humana, make a little bit on the other ones, and we're happy. And then he says, yeah, that's fair. You're not being greedy. And he goes to his team and says, hey, can you guys stop just sending Humanas to them and send everyone, but what one of the important things I want to get a point across is, in our industry, there's not, at least in our area, I should say, which I would think is true for other areas as well, there's not a lot of competition out there doing this. So it's not like it's a saturated market and competition. No one else is having that conversation with those docs. I guarantee you.
100%. And man, see that, even in the pre-show, I was telling you, like, even my strategy, like this is so important. I think it's such a subtle but very important point, is that everybody thinks that everybody else is doing this. And the fact is they're not. And I think I think that at that point, for sure, like, people, if they remember nothing else, they got to remember this. Because it's kind of like, I remember when everybody was applying for, when you're applying for colleges, they would encourage you to apply for scholarships. And I still remember a friend of mine was like, everybody, there's like everybody, they'd be like, oh God, I'm not even going to fill out this application for a scholarship. I mean, it's just, I'm not going to win it or whatever. And I remember on the other side, filing some of these pieces of paper and doing it and getting some, or whatever. And I remember then I would call and be like, hey, just out of curiosity, like, how many people did I win this out over? And in one particular case, it was like maybe only like a $10,000 like little mini scholarship or whatever. But like I remember that particular lady that answered the phone. She's like, "Oh, you were like there were only like 5 applications, so we just approved all 5."
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, "What?" So yeah, I mean, this is like so true of a lot of different industries. But it's so fascinating, that friction, that perceived friction of how hard it is to like recruit this role, manage this role, and take the bet on this role. That mental friction is actually harder to overcome than the actual friction of running that function at your business. And that's
Yeah.
why it's so easy to dominate. I mean, I'm glad you said that though, because it's probably the most important point that you've made through this whole thing, is that like you're exploiting the market, and not in a nefarious way, but you're exploiting a market instead of going head to head with
And
somebody else.
the more sophisticated your team gets, there's a hard to measure ROI, because like my guy Jason's been with us for almost 5 years. He's gotten so much better and so much more comfortable that now, like we talked about at the beginning with some of in the pre-show, about some of our strategies now, maybe going after bigger entities like ACOs and hospital groups, right? That this guy now is fully capable of doing that. Whereas, a couple years ago, I would say not so much. But like the fact that he's cut his teeth on an orthopedic group is not an easy group to get into either. They're very insulated and very busy and hard to get a hold of. But I mean, if you can listening to your podcast with Dana, it's like we can add real value now, like in
Right.
this affordability and this model where we can add. We're positioned as private practices billing under Part B to be one of the most affordable, effective services that is out there right now. And we need to be going and having these conversations. So like, this teams thing coming down the pipeline in 26, 2025 is going to be the year where the people are getting on a contractual level with these groups. And if you don't do it now, you're going to be missing out. So a big push for this year is going to be exactly that. And that, talk about a big faucet turning on. If you can contract with an ACO in your area for all of the things that they're going to be scrutinized on, which is joint replacements and spinal fusions. If you can say, hey, 80% of these patients don't require home health care, Part A home health, we have a team that can go to their home and bill outpatient services at half the price. You're going to get a seat at the table.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Strata Stories. Strata PT combines your EMR and billing into one automated system to increase revenue and achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate for physical, occupational, and speech therapy clinics. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and billing services work, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.